ready, Chief Henderson?
Yes, I am.
All right, perfect. Well then, if everyone's recording, thank you so much again for taking the time to chat with us. Really appreciate
absolutely.
it. I would love to start with talking a little bit about the Raul Meza apology that happened a couple of months ago.
That is correct.
Let's just start by talking, Austin Police is not in the habit necessarily of apologizing for when cases are handled or mishandled in certain circumstances.
Right.
What kind of led up to that decision to issue such a formal apology?
Well, it was clear that we had received a DNA or CODIS hit which had not been followed up on. And while we don't, or investigators don't believe it truly impacted the investigative steps that were taken, they were already aware of the relationship that existed. It was still something that we should have followed up on, and we didn't. So I believe it was appropriate to issue an apology to the family and also to our Austin community, because the expectation, particularly when it comes to homicides, that all investigative leads are followed up on.
And we talk a lot about trust in the police and where we go from there. Obviously, you were not in charge at the time when the tip was received and not investigated. But how do we work on building back that trust now that we know that was what happened?
Right. Well, first things first, we needed to address that situation and understand where the misstep or where the gap had occurred. And so that was the first thing, was addressing how do we improve our internal processes to make sure that this did not happen again. Then, of course, being transparent with the family, but also being transparent with the community. And so taking the steps that we have in order to mitigate that by putting new policies in place, new redundant notification processes in place to make sure that it's not just one person that's getting notified. Several people are getting notified to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
And with that, do you feel that this maybe puts you back a few steps in terms of the public reputation towards Austin Police? And again, if so, how do we work on that?
Right. No, absolutely. It surely has. I can't imagine that the community or the family would think that this was okay. And so, like I said, it is being transparent. The issue was brought to our attention. We immediately addressed it, but then we were very direct with explaining this is the circumstances that happened. It should not have happened. These are the corrective actions we've taken.
With that, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the specifics of what exactly happened. One of the questions that we had, and I had put this in the message that I sent to you guys, was about if this relates to the G file. We talk a lot about police oversight, and that's sort of the Police Oversight Act is what it's called.
Correct.
This was a circumstance where the officer received the tip, did not investigate it because they were assigned to the 2020 protests and were handling that, as I understand it. And then because it's been so long since that, they cannot be formally disciplined for that. Would something like this go into the G file that would then be a part of their personnel record?
That is correct, because the internal review that we immediately initiated is there's that administrative component. And so when we were looking at what potential policies were violated, what processes or standard operating procedures were not followed, that falls into that administrative review or administrative investigation, if you will. And as with all administrative investigations, it is part of that G file that you're referencing.
As part of that, we talk again about trust and how we lay into that. This is something that I think the public is asking for when we talk about having access to those G file records. Do you think that this is an argument for opening up that transparency from the police department as it plays out in the bigger narrative of the Police Oversight Act?
I can see how there is that connection, if you will, but I can also respect and value that this is what the state law standard is related to G file and G file protection. And so while that is there, that need for that transparency, please know as it falls under state law, we're required to follow that law and policy.
Again, you were kind of handed this case. You were not in charge when that happened 4 years ago, when that wasn't investigated properly. Where do we go from here? Is there anything that can be done? Obviously, this officer cannot be disciplined, but is there anything that the police department can do to sort of reconcile with that?
Yes, and like I said, starting with, of course, acknowledging that there was a misstep, but then also being public and transparent about it, but then also offering apology to the family and also our community. And then when we talk about making sure that we put in steps to address it and having that redundancy is, I believe, steps towards improving that trust in the community, in that we're not trying to hide, not trying to mitigate. This is what happened. This is what we've done to correct, and this is how we're going to move forward.
It was such a high-profile case, and I don't believe Austin Police is in the usual routine business of so directly weighing in on a case that has not yet gone through the court system and things of that nature. Have you had much communication with the family other than the formal apology, and what has their reaction to that apology been?
I have had communication and in-person meeting with the family, in addition to more of our staff has also too, and they continue to be in contact with them on a continual basis. And of course, they were upset. They voiced their concerns with me and with other members of my staff. And so we did the best that we can to address their of course issues that they had. They were of course very direct with me, which I appreciated, and I very much understand. Not necessarily can't understand when it comes to losing a loved one in that manner, but can understand that there's the expectation that their case is going to be handled with the utmost level of investigative processes. Everything's going to be followed up on, and it was clear that that had not been done.
You know, the phrase is always that it's not so much the crime, it's the cover-up, or that's not at all what you did here. But do you think that you're going to look back on how you handled when you did get this information next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and say, we did what we could, we did the right thing?
Absolutely, and I believe that has been our standard practice with my time as being interim. Very transparent, very direct, just telling it like it is, taking ownership when we need to. Absolutely, and so that's going to be the standard course moving forward.
I'd love to then move on a little bit to the staff vacancies. I wrote in the email that I sent to your office that to hear the Austin Police Association describe it, they say that we're at a breaking point. That's actually a direct quote from something that the president of the Austin Police Association said to us, specifically in the context of how handling things like the UT protest put a strain on the department. In their numbers, they say that there are 328 officers vacancies that they need officers for. Just to ask you that, how much of a crisis are we in?
It is a staffing crisis, and please know when you reference that number, it does not include the 150 positions that were removed from our staffing levels, our sworn staffing levels in 2020. And so when you wrap in those numbers, we're just shy of 500 officers short. And so as Austin is a growing city, when you look across the skyline, it's filled with cranes and growth and development, and the draw to Austin, because it is just a great and vibrant city, for people to move here has not waned. So the population increase, however, our staffing has just attrited over the years. And while we are being innovative in how we deliver our policing services, when it comes to that human element, which is our most valuable capital, is our human element. When we just don't have the number of officers that we need in order to serve our community, it does put a strain. So crisis, when we describe it or say it is a crisis, that's legitimate. Yeah.
Kind of exactly going off of that, I think crisis is one of those words that can get thrown around, and we know what it means, but we can't really wrap our heads around it.
Right.
You know, if this isn't a question that you can answer, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a strain would you say is on the Austin Police Department at this moment?
Right. Well, I would say it varies from day to day. So you did mention the protests. Then, of course, whenever there's a large-scale event, South by Southwest, ACL, UT football season is about to kick off again. And so when you're talking about those peaks in events, it does add another layer of strain, if you will. But when it comes to responding to those priority calls, those we call them P0s and P1s, hot shots and priorities calls, we need enough officers in patrol cars to respond to those in a timely fashion. And we can't always predict when those peaks in those calls might be, but nonetheless, we need to be prepared in order to make sure we're keeping our community safe and responding in an adequate time frame. And so when you add that layer on, in addition to the expected quality of service that the community is expecting, that's what they're used to, that's what they're accustomed to. And so when you add that on, those are just a lot of factors to contend with when we're dealing with a dwindling police force.
I want to talk about one of those busier days, which we've already alluded to, which was the UT Austin protests. I'd love to start just by a little bit of housekeeping. You had several organizations that were involved in handling those protests, departments, as well as Austin Police Department. In a circumstance, or I guess in just that specific circumstance, where does the chain of command fall? Who is kind of deferring to whom, if that makes sense?
Right, okay, yes, so please understand that those types of operations, because it was on UT campus, it was a request from them to the Austin Police Department to have our assistance. They knew in advance the scale of the protests, and so standard mutual aid, when another agency reaches out and asks for our assistance, we will respond.
So they were in charge to say?
That is correct.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about that day and that communication that you had with them. At what point did you know this is not looking like it's heading in the right direction and we need to really get involved, and just what were those conversations like?
Please know that there was some pre-planning that went into that, because we did have some sense or some understanding of the scale of the number of participants in the protest. And so there were conversations or pre-planning that went in before the day of. And so we were already staged or in a position to provide that assistance. And so essentially it was a organized response in that we already had officers staged that were ready to respond. And so we had already laid the groundwork for this would be the circumstance in which we would be called upon. And essentially that's how that transpired.
I don't remember if Riley was there. I know Sean and I were there that first day, April 24th. And I remember thinking to myself, and in fact I saw someone I knew who was at the protest and said to him, I can just feel that it's not going well. Something is going to happen. I can just kind of feel with the direction and the relations between the officers who were on the ground and the protesters that something was going to happen. And ultimately, a few minutes later, the first person was arrested, followed by several dozen after that. Was there a moment where I don't know how much communication you were having with the officers on the ground that day, but was there a moment, if you were having communication, where you felt like something is going to happen, that there are going to be arrests, that this is not heading in the right direction?
I can't necessarily say in advance, if you will. So please understand there's several layers of chain of command, and so it was the supervisors that were on scene that were handling that situation, and so it was a notification once we were reaching that point to where UT was asking us to assist with arrests, that notification was made to me. And so please know that when I talk about pre-planning, that's part of the discussion and natural dialogue whenever we're going to be assisting with another agency, who's going to be taking the lead, what authority do we have, who's doing what when. And so essentially when we got called to assist, these were already discussions that had already been had.
Was there anything, when you look back on it, and I know that a lot of this, as you said, was pre-planned in the response, whether it's you wish you had more officers, I know you wish you had more officers, just in general. Was there anything that if you look back on April 24th or even April 29th and you said, if we could go back, I wish we could do this differently? Is there anything like that?
I say there's always opportunity to improve, and maybe if there was an opportunity to do maybe some more large-scale type scenario-based incidents with UT, with DPS prior to that, I would say that would probably, if anything, that probably stands out.
I hadn't planned on asking this, but it has to do with that and just the morale around public trust in the Austin Police Department. One of the chants that several people shouted was APD, KKK, IDF, they're all the same. What does that say to you about what the community believes about the Austin Police Department, and what would you say to them?
Everybody's entitled to their own opinions, and so them sharing their opinions, no issues there. If anything, I would ask that people take the time to learn about our organization and our department. Our officers and our civilian staff that work here, they are phenomenal, and please know that they are always doing what is expected of them, but then also keeping in mind that we don't want to do anything that's going to have adverse impacts or adverse harm to our community members. And they are professional, they are hardworking, and then they are well vested in doing what's right and doing what's best for the city and for the department. And we do. Everybody here has a servant heart. They truly do, particularly in these very challenging times. To have the staff that we do that have remained resilient and stuck in there when we've gone through this reform, this reimagining public safety, the scrutiny that law enforcement has faced. Those that are still here, they're wanting to be a part of that positive change, and they're willing to do the hard work. We would just ask for that time for people to, first of all, give us the opportunity to make those adjustments, but then also be invested in learning what we're doing in order to make those improvements, not just as a policing agency, but as the Austin Police Department specifically.
When you're 330 officers short, when you look back, was the APD prepared to handle something on a scale like those UT protests? I know you guys were just assisting. Do you think that you guys were fully prepared to handle that? Absolutely.
And understand that was part of the conversation too, is that letting them know, hey, this is the number that we're able to provide. These are the number of officers, support staff that we can provide, and this is the duration of time in which we can provide them, because we're truly cognizant of our staffing challenges and staffing shortages, and we're not going to be participating in something that could draw our resources away from our primary mission, which is to keep the community of Austin, the city of Austin, safe. And so understand that those conversations were also had as far as how many personnel and how long.
I want to move on now to another sort of large-scale event, which was South by Southwest. Specifically, we had that hit and run incident. Now 2 people are dead after that. One of the questions that we had is how a situation like that is supposed to go when with the police response. You've obviously got South by Southwest, one of the biggest events in Austin ever, that's happening right next door, and someone is fleeing from police officers, and ultimately they had struck and killed 2 people. What, I hate to even say an ideal scenario, because in an ideal scenario there isn't a chase like that, but what should an officer think when a chase like that is happening, knowing that South by Southwest is next door, and saying whether they should pursue them or shouldn't pursue them?
Right. Please know that's exactly what went through their mind when they initiated. So they thought of course, all the pedestrian traffic that was down there, and they chose to stop pursuing. However, the suspect still was traveling at a rate of speed to indicate that he was fleeing from police, even though our officers had disengaged and had turned off their lights, had stopped their vehicle, and had decided that they weren't going to pursue the suspect. The suspect just continued on at a high rate of speed. So these, as a result of 2014, these were conversations that resulted from that situation, and so the officers were well aware and did not choose to pursue. But like I said, the suspect was still traveling at a rate of speed that resulted in, unfortunately, two human lives being lost.
You mentioned the 2014 incident, and that was something I wanted to bring up. I think that when this news happened, immediately everyone thought of what happened in 2014.
Right.
I hate to say improvement, but do you think that we are headed, like comparing the response in 2014 to response 10 years later in February of this year, do you think that that was handled properly, and that APD was prepared to handle something like that happening to prevent another incident like what happened in 2014?
And when we talk about prevent, there are a lot of dynamics. All we can do is our best to help mitigate, to try and keep something like that from reoccurring. But when you have a high density of people, high density of vehicles, we can only do so much. I believe we did take appropriate measures as a result of 2014, and like I said, when it came to that pursuit or choosing not to pursue, that's a direct result of that. In addition to that, we had our rescue task force, which is a combination of fire, EMS, and APD personnel that were essentially arriving on scene within, I believe, less than a minute. They were literally right there, and I believe that immediate response, although the victims did not survive, I believe that's another one of those improvement techniques that we have done to improve that getting that medical treatment in that very dense situation. And by having a response time of like that is another thing that we've done in order to improve outcomes.
And that's kind of another weird question surrounding this, but talking about improved response between the 2014 incident and 2024. I'd love to hear you expound on that, on some of the things that APD has done to prepare for something like that following 2014's fatal crash, like some of the lessons learned, if you will, that went into effect in this February incident.
Yes, and so one thing we did was coming up with more clear delineations on paths of travel for vehicles and for pedestrians. We had more street closures there. There were more officers positioned on the barricades. We were clear about making sure that there were actual vehicles behind those barricades, to where if it was a vehicle or a vehicle breach to barricades, there would be another more solid implementation there to help try and mitigate any drivers getting through the barricades. In addition to that, there was a lot of public messaging in advance to make sure people just aware of their surroundings. In addition, like I said, when it came to making sure that we don't pursue into densely populated areas, making those improvements there, and then also spoke to those rescue task force that are in place, that were essentially on scene within a minute.
Kind of the last topic I wanted to get into, I hate to even say that it's ending on a little bit of a higher note, but homicides nationwide, and especially in urban areas, are declining.
They are.
Austin is no exception. That recent data from Datalytics, which was reviewed by Axios, found that in Austin, homicides were down by 42% in Q1 of 2024 compared to Q1 of 2023. I'd love to start just by asking, is that something that you and your officers are noticing firsthand, that you're seeing, that violent crime and homicides are going down? Is that something you're noticing?
I would say that our homicide number is less than it was at the same time last year. I would also say that the life-saving measures that we do have in place now, not just with police, but also with fire and EMS, we are better at rendering that immediate life-saving measures that then results in less violent incidents resulting in homicide. So there have been improvements there. As far as violent crime goes, while the trend isn't as high, I will tell you that we want to have a safe city, and any type of violent crime is something that we need to work on. Same with our homicide rate. So while yes, it is trending down, we still need to do better.
You sound somber when we talk about that. I figured this was a good story, that homicide rates are going down. What holds you back from kind of saying yes, like homicide rates are? I'm doing that. I'm going to drag my microphone out.
Right.
What holds you back from kind of just embracing that as good news?
In the fact that there's still Austin community members that are losing their lives, and the impact that it's having on their families. And when you talk about the city of Austin and it being a safe place, we want it not to be anecdotal. We want it to be real. And so any loss of life, particularly when it comes to via violent actions of others, it's still something that we need to work on. And so while it is a good thing, absolutely, there's still room for improvement.
You kind of answered this by talking about the life-saving measures that your officers have been taking and other emergency officials have been taking. The question that I had written was, is there something that APD is doing that is directly benefiting a decreasing homicide rate? So you kind of mentioned the life-saving procedures, but are there other things that officers are doing that are contributing to lower violent crime rates?
Well, of course. So if we're just going to talk about in the realm of first aid and that type, all of our cadets receive first aid training. There's additional levels of first aid training that they can receive once they graduate, and they're encouraged to do so. Most of the officers carry their own medical and first aid beyond what the department provides them, and so taking that active interest in doing everything that they can to have the best outcome, and being so I would say progressive, and wanting to provide that level of care, that initial level of care by our officers, is something definitely that they have just organically or innately done And so that's very much appreciated. Understand when it comes to our staffing, we just have to be innovative in how we are doing what we can to address violent crime, whether it's through initiatives, whether it's through, hey, we have a hotspot, we need to hire overtime. If that's what we need to do, then that's what we'll do. Mm-hmm.
The last question that I've written is, it's a little bit of an odd one, but with where we are in terms of staffing, which as you've just said is yes, a crisis,
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm just realizing we never talked about improvements. I'd love to get to that in a second.
Okay.
So this will not be my last question,
Okay.
but where we are in terms of staffing and if the homicide rate is going up, it's almost like in my mind I'm wondering if we're in a state of equilibrium where if the violent crime rate was just a little bit higher, the staff would be put under exponentially more stress, or if the staffing was even just a little bit lower, that it would just be harder to handle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm curious if you think if it is kind of like a yes, we're just kind of in this state of we're just where we can handle. If we had a little bit more stress, it would be exponentially harder for us to handle. If that makes sense, is that something that you feel Austin Police is going through?
I would say if we had zero homicides, that's a fantastic place to be. Of course, not all homicides are preventable, but at the same time, there's that. Please understand, there's a component here that we haven't touched on, which is officer wellness, and making sure that our officers have that downtime to recover, get that break from policing. That way, when they do show up, they're fresh, ready to go. And so, the less officers that we have, the more that we need to pick up the extra load, because the work doesn't stop, nor is the expectation of that quality of policing services. That does not diminish either. And so having a workforce that allows for that proper decompression time, that proper time to recharge the batteries, take a mental break from it, that's a component too that we need to be aware of. And so while our officers are doing phenomenal work, they truly are doing great work, even with the staffing crisis that we're in. There still is a strong need to have more officers. There just is.
So then, then my real last question is then again talking a little bit about recruiting the new officers. And I believe when we spoke in, I think it was early April at the officer graduation, you were so enthusiastic about the next class of cadets.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I was.
No, and so
I was.
I'd love to talk with you about how hopeful you are for short term. Obviously, I hope you're hopeful in the long term, but in the short term, how confident are you in the recruitment that's going on?
Very, very confident in it. Of course, we can always do more. But right now, we are being intentional about our 30 by 30 campaign, which is to have our workforce be represented by 30% females by the year 2030. And so we just had an event 2 weekends ago where it was an interactive recruiting effort that we did at the training academy. So we had our various specialized units there, we had our recruiting team there, and so there was an opportunity for prospective applicants to come, interact with the officers, ask questions directly from them, see the various details and stuff that they could be a part of. And so we did that. We are also being intentional about coming up with different methods of reaching that younger group through that social media. Now social media drives everything, and so we're being innovative in how we communicate, not just the need that we have for officers, but just what a rewarding career that it is, and how you can truly give back to the community. And when you talk about that reform and the change that policing is going through, this is an awesome time to join, because we are going through that process, and to be a part of that process, but then also give back to the community, have that servant capacity in the midst of this growth and change. This is a fantastic time to be a part of it.
All right, Chief Henderson, that's all that I have. Was there anything that I missed that you wanted to make sure that we talked about, anything like that?
No, just appreciate your time and being here. We do have a class that's in right now. We have about 60 cadets in that class. I believe they graduate in September. And then we're going to be starting another class in July, and those numbers are trending probably in the about 70 in that class. And so there's a little bit of an uptick in the number of cadets that we're able to put into the class. But at the same time, please know it's a long process. So it takes about a year from the date that they start a cadet class to the time that they're a fully fledged officer on their own. Is about a year time frame. So while the numbers are a little bit improved, it is going to take a little bit of time to see the difference out on the streets in those numbers. So we just appreciate the community's support. We truly do, and appreciate you taking the time to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief Henderson. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button and get the latest news by downloading the CBS Austin News app.